Everyone, and welcome to today's talk on FTD, or frontotemporal dementia. My name is Robin Smart, and I'm a public education coordinator with the Alzheimer Society, Waterloo, Wellington. We're sorry that we can't meet with you in person. Please remember that if you have any questions, any concerns about any type of dementia at all, just call our offices. The staff is there to help. There's no charge for the services, so please be in touch with us. What I'm going to do in the next few minutes is talk a little bit about FTD and give you a bit of background, some resources that you can look for. But again, I encourage you at the end of watching this, reach out and connect with one of our support staff. So what is frontotemporal dementia? I'm going to tell you by showing some slides. So let me share some slides with you. And I'll just put my screen up. What we have today is a set of slides on FTD, and we also have some recommendations for further reading at the end of the slideshow. Okay. So the Alzheimer Society Waterloo Wellington would like to help enhance your understanding of frontotemporal dementia. What I'm going to do is run through these slides, and if you have any questions, call the Society. So let's start by talking a little bit about how our brain works. What we're going to do is look at three different drawings here on the page. And the first one is this almost cartoon shape. Looks a little funny. That is actually a drawing of a neuron or a brain cell. So obviously here's the nucleus, and then this is called the axon, and you come down to the end. These are dendrites, and at the end of any dendrite, you'll find a synapse. Here's a blow up of a synapse. Synapse is a fancy way of describing how messages exchange from one brain cell to another brain cell. The messages are represented by these little dots of light. You can see the dots of light sliding down here. This is a message on its way somewhere. And the electric impulse, represented by the light, the electric impulse has to go down the cell, get to the synapse at the end of the cell, and then transfer itself over to the next cell. In order for that to happen, you have to have two healthy cells, one to give the signal and one to receive the signal. So when our neurons or our nerve cells in our brain aren't working at full capacity, messages don't get through. No matter what type of dementia people have, and this is a slide showing a lot of common types of dementia, no matter what type of dementia someone has, we're the go-to society. I know we're called the Alzheimer Society, but we are the go-to place for any type of dementia. And I'm going to just talk briefly about these types of dementia, and then we'll go into real detail about the frontotemporal. Alzheimer's disease is the most common type of dementia that there is, and many people associate it with memory loss. True that memory loss is often one of the first signs and symptoms for Alzheimer's, but it's much more than memory loss alone. About 64% of cases of all dementias develop from Alzheimer's disease. And Alzheimer's disease is something that, although it normally strikes after the age of 65, can happen earlier in life. Then we have frontotemporal diseases, and there's several which we will talk about. FTD is the short form because it's such a mouthful to say frontotemporal each and every time. And FTD is a much, much rarer form of dementia. It is not nearly as common. Then there's something called Lewy body dementia. And Lewy body looks a bit like a cross between Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. It's a dementia that's characterized by vivid visual hallucinations and changes in mobility, slowness and rigidity in movement for people. Then there's vascular dementia, the second most common type of dementia that there is. And vascular dementia occurs when, unfortunately, cells are destroyed due to blood loss. It could be because there's a clot. It could be because there's been a bleed in the brain. Vascular dementia is often stepwise in progression because people will experience a TIA, or a transient ischemic attack, and then that little TIA leads to some damage in the brain. And So much accumulates, and then you see a drop in function, and then so many TIs occur, and there's another drop in function. Unfortunately, it is possible to have more than one type of dementia at a time. And so there's an arrow there leading to mixed dementias. When we're talking about mixed dementias, we're usually referring to Alzheimer's and vascular at the same time. But it is possible to have Alzheimer's and Lewy body together. Then the very last arrow points to young onset dementia. Now, I mentioned that Alzheimer's disease is mostly a senior's disease, but it can certainly occur under the age of 65. Whenever any dementia occurs under the age of 65, it's referred to as young onset. Well, FTD, frontotemporal dementias, very common that they are young onset. They're the other type of dementia that tends to strike at a younger age. No matter what type of dementia, or even if you don't know the exact type, you just know that somebody you know has dementia. No matter what type we're talking about changes in the way the brain cells communicate together. That's why we showed you the first slide. We want you to be able to picture messages getting through, because when folks have dementia, messages don't get through the same way. So what is dementia? In a nutshell, we're talking about a situation where it's not actually a disease in and of itself. Dementia is defined as a syndrome or a collection of symptoms. When we're talking about dementia, we're talking about changes in memory, language, judgment, reasoning, ability to perform daily tasks, and changes in personality and behavior that worsen over time. Now, the good news is dementia, well, it's not good that there are so many dementias, but there are a wide variety of causes of dementia. And sometimes those causes are reversible. So sometimes you can look like you have one of the dementias that I just described, but it's considered an acute situation and it can be addressed with medical intervention. Could be under the reversible category, a delirium, an undiagnosed or atypical depression, Lyme disease, thyroid disease, heart disease, alcohol abuse, undiagnosed diabetes, malnutrition, medication interactions. There are many, many reasons. So if you are the least concerned about somebody's cognition, please get it checked out. Let's reverse it if it's something that's reversible. And then there are, unfortunately, the situations where we're not able to cure. The ones I just listed for you, the Alzheimer's, vascular, FTD, Lewy body. So what I'm going to do is now get into the details. Let's look at FTD. This is a link to a tiny film in England. The UK Society, Alzheimer Society has put out a series of really good little vignettes, and we're going to watch one right now.
Frontotemporal dementia. Frontotemporal dementia covers a range of conditions that affect the frontal and temporal lobes of the brain. These areas control behaviour, emotional responses, and language. This means that people with this type of dementia often experience changes in personality and mood, and struggle with language, for example, in finding the right word. This is a fairly rare form of dementia, which is more likely to affect younger people. One of the diseases that causes frontotemporal dementia includes Pick's disease. Pick's disease occurs when a protein called tau, which is also involved in Alzheimer's disease, starts to accumulate in nerve cells. It forms spherical blobs of protein, which are thought to be linked to nerve cell death. Unlike most other causes of dementia, there is often a strong family link with frontotemporal dementia. Scientists have identified genes that are linked to frontotemporal dementia, but our understanding of it is still very limited.
All right, so a little intro to FTD. So frontotemporal dementia, it primarily affects the front and temporal lobes of the brain. The front lobes, if you were to take the line on your wrist and put it on your eyebrow on both sides, and then wrap your hands around your head, where my hand's covered, those are the front lobes of your brain. They're huge. They're the largest portion of your brain. And the temporal lobes are down the side of the brain. When you rub your temples because you got a headache, that's over the temporal area. And what can happen is that the changes occur inside the brain cell. Sometimes these brain cells shrink. In other cases, the brain cells get larger. They contain large silver bodies called Pix bodies. But either way, it affects the cell so that the cell cannot communicate with the next cell beside it. In both situations, whether it's the shrinkage or whether it's the enlarging of the cells, it leads to changes in behavior and problems with speech very often, particularly in the early stages. Sadly, it's progressive and degenerative. Estimated that approximately 2 to 5% of all dementia cases are FTD. So that's a pretty small amount overall. But it is the second most common dementia in people under the age of 65. And about 20 to 40% of people with FTD do have a family history. So the brain functions affected. Here's the picture. Let's talk about the front lobe. This is the blue section in our picture. I know your brain isn't these pretty colors, but we wanted it to stand out so you could see it. So there's the front lobe of your brain. And brain functions affected by FTD. It's the organizational center. It's the CEO of your brain. So your executive functioning, your planning, your sequencing, your multitasking. It's the area that helps you manage emotional responses. So how can you decide what is appropriate from inappropriate? That's housed in the front lobes. What's socially acceptable? Judgment and reasoning sit in the front lobes. Personality and mood. The ability to link words to form coherent sentences. And motor functions, moving your arms, legs, mouth, etc. Those all reside in the blue area, the front lobe. If you have FTD, all of these brain functions are going to be affected. When we think about the temporal lobe, and that's the green lobe here at the side, the green lobe, the temporal lobe. When we think about the temporal lobe, that's an area that holds the ability to recognize objects, recognize people, recognize faces. It helps you relate appropriate emotions to events and objects, because every single memory we have is laid down with a small piece of emotion attached to it. And so that's where this is involved. Speaking, reading, writing, understand words, the meaning of words, that resides in the temporal lobes, and also the ability to remember new information. So some of the warning signs, early warning signs and symptoms, they really do vary from person to person. So this is not necessarily an exhaustive list. People have their very own, very individual journey with any type of dementia. And so when you've met one person with dementia, you've met one person with dementia. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a list of some of the typical signs that you might see. You might see inappropriate behavior in public, or people being very impulsive, losing inhibitions. You might see overeating or a change in food preferences, suddenly liking sweet food. You might see a real change, and I would say decline in table manners. Might notice a neglect in personal hygiene. People might become repetitive or show some obsessional behavior, such as humming or hand rubbing or foot tapping, or they might develop complex routines such as walking exactly the same route repetitively. People might seem more selfish or unreasonable. They might lose their ability to empathize with others, and it makes them look a little cold and uncaring. You might see irritability and aggression, or people being tactless and rude. People may be quite less outgoing than they were in the past, or they may be more lethargic. They may really lack enthusiasm for things. So there are many and varied symptoms. So just going to take you through some of the technical terms, because there are several types of frontotemporal disorders. There's not just one. So what you will notice, what is common, is progressive behavioral decline. On this slide, this is what we're talking about. Diagnostic terms. They sometimes call it behavioral variant frontotemporal dementia. What a mouthful. They shorten it down to BV for behavioral variant, FTD. Temporal/frontal variant, FTV, and Pick's disease. And all of these are all FTDs that involve behavior decline. And what you tend to see early is apathy. That's that reduced initiative, the inability to start things, an inability to hold interest in things. You might see inappropriate and impulsive behaviors. You really might notice emotional flatness, flat affect, no facial expression, or excessive emotion. It could go the other way. But at this point, generally memory is intact. And people who think that memory loss is the first sign of dementia might miss dementia because memory is still intact here. There's also FTDs that have language decline, progressive language decline, primary progressive aphasia, PPA. And that PPA, primary progressive aphasia, is broken down into 3 types as well. Logopenic, which is trouble finding the right word while speaking, having hesitation and or pauses in speech. There's progressive non-fluent aphasia, where folks omit words that make their sentences make sense. They miss the words that link the nouns and verbs. So as, to, from, the. And you would also notice here difficulty swallowing. And then semantic dementia, where people can't understand words or recognize familiar people and objects. And all 3 subtypes come under PPA. There are also types of FTD that really show progressive motor decline. So corticobasal degeneration, quite rare. Muscle rigidity would be very obvious. Difficulty closing buttons, operating simple appliances. Again, the trouble swallowing. And language and spatial orientation problems. People get they struggle to manipulate objects and find their way within a space. And there's PSP, progressive supranuclear palsy, progressive problems with balance and walking, can often look a tiny bit like Parkinson's, slow movement, lots of falls, body stiffness, and they tend to have restricted eye movement. They really can't move their eyes up or down. There are also types of FTD with motor continued. There's not just those 2, there are more. There's FTD with Parkinsonianism. That's movement problems similar to Parkinson's, such as slowed movements and stiffness. Changes in behavior or language accompany that. And there's the ALS variant, so FTD with ALS. Combination of, unfortunately, I think most people know it as Lou Gehrig's disease. Change in behavior and language, and muscle weakness and loss, fine jerks, wiggling in the muscles. Well, how do you know what you've got? You start with your family doctor. There is no single assessment. There is no single test. It will be what they call a diagnosis of exclusion. What they're going to do is they're going to rule out all the other possible causes. Is this a medication interaction? Is this some other disease that we haven't picked up? Is this due to brain tumors? Is this due to normal pressure hydrocephalus? What else could it possibly be? So they're going to rule out all those other possibilities and see what's left. Usually they start by getting a baseline assessment of how somebody is functioning, and then they're going to look for change over time. Although you start with your GP, your family physician, you will likely be referred on to some sort of specialist, either in a clinic, a memory clinic or a diagnostic clinic, perhaps a neurologist, perhaps a geriatrician, but there are specialists and you will probably be involved with one at some point. Treatment options. As far as medications go, I'm sorry to share that currently there are no specific medications for any of the FTD types. The cholinesterase inhibitors that are used to treat Alzheimer's disease aren't an effective treatment for FTD because it targets a different part of the brain. What is sometimes used are medications to help reduce agitation, irritability, or depression. So there are some treatment options that are other, we call them other therapies. They're the non-pharmacological therapies. Physical activity, can't emphasize physical activity enough. Physical activity helps our bodies and our brains. It helps us reduce stress. It helps us keep a routine. It helps us with our balance and our health. It does help with memory and cognition. So really physical activity is up there. Access to personalized music can really help improve mood and behavior. It does have to be the kind of music, not necessarily that you like to listen to, but the person with the diagnosis likes to listen to. That can be hugely helpful. And that has to do with the fact that music resides in a different part of the brain than language. So even when language is badly damaged, the ability to enjoy and respond to music is left intact. Any person-centered activity that emphasizes their current strengths and abilities will help improve quality of life. So that's very individualized. Person-centered is just a fancy way of saying what appeals to them, what is of interest to the person themselves, because obviously that's going to change from person to person. So a little bit about progression of FTD. I said before, it really varies from person to person. It's hard to tell the length of time that any disease course will run. The average is somewhere between 2 to 10 years, but really it can last anywhere from 2 to 20 years. Genetically speaking, about 60% of cases are sporadic. Most cases, they don't know what causes it. Some certainly are autosomal, which means inheritable. And some are familial. That means that it's a combination sometimes of both genetics and environmental factors. So in the early stages, people often only have one type of symptom, maybe problems with language or maybe changes in behavior. But as FTD progresses, no matter what type you have, you will see that other areas of the brain become affected. You get more symptoms, symptoms overlap. Often in FTD, memory remains intact. It's not one of the first symptoms that you would expect to see is affected. And all of the changes that come are quite subtle. It starts insidiously, it starts slowly, it grows over time, but we're talking about over the space of years, actually. In the middle moderate stage, that's a more rapidly emerging changes. You're going to see more changes in a shorter period of time. And in late stage, people do become quite dependent on for what we refer to as ADLs or activities of daily living. That's requiring support with maybe bathing, dressing, toileting, feeding, that sort of thing. You tend to notice a real decrease in mobility in the later stages. And that's when you might see forgetfulness and disorientation. So types of symptoms. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through each of these individually: behavioral symptoms, movement symptoms, language symptoms, and emotions. So let's start with behavioral. Very often, a change that you're going to notice and pick up on is compulsive eating, especially starchy foods like breads and cookies, anything sweet. Social disinhibition, acts impulsively, sees something, wants something, reaches out and takes something, whether it's theirs or not. Or they don't have the ability to filter their comments, and they might make a comment that's not socially or politically correct without having any appreciation that it could upset or hurt the feelings of the person receiving that comment. Utilization behavior, isn't that a fancy term? It really refers to the difficulty to resist impulses to touch or fondle or manipulate any object that's within reach. So they might sit and stroke the wall, or they might sit and stroke a tabletop. They have to be touching things. Perseveration, that's just a fancy way of saying they repeat actions or they repeat words. So it's repetition over and over. And difficulty with executive functioning. That comes from those big front lobes of the brain. So they're going to have trouble planning to do something and executing that. They're going to have trouble knowing what order they should do things in. As far as language goes, I'm going to talk about aphasia. Now, aphasia is the clinical term for loss of language. When we're talking about aphasia, it really involves two pathways, language in and language out. So if I do not understand what you are saying to me, I have receptive aphasia. If I can't get my message out to you, I have expressive aphasia. So when you have aphasia, you will struggle to understand language, whether it is in spoken format or written format. And language problems typically become worse for about the first 2 years after they appear. Dysarthria, the physical ability to speak is impaired. You sound a little bit drunk, believe it or not. You sound slurry in your speech, and it has to do with the inability for your throat, your jaw, your cheeks, and your tongue to coordinate together so that you can appropriately articulate. You can't get those muscles and all those symptoms working in sync. Movement, changes in movement. Dystonia is the abnormal posture of hands and feet. You might see changes, curves. Gait disorder, shuffling while walking, frequent falls. Tremor, usually of the hands. When somebody has a Parkinson's tremor, the hand usually tremors at rest. And as soon as they reach out and do something, the hand will stop tremoring. With FTD, you might see the tremor exist not just at rest, but during action. And clumsiness, difficulty holding or using small objects. We mentioned the buttons earlier, zippers, any sort of clasp, any sort of dome, hook and eye, that sort of thing. Motion-wise, here's this word apathy again. It's that part of the brain is literally switched off, and a person's ability to be interested or to care about stuff has been turned off. So they appear to have a lack of interest or drive. They don't think to engage, to start activities, to participate in conversation. You may really notice a lack of facial expression. And we as humans, we communicate a great deal through our body language. Believe it or not, words are only responsible for 7% of our communication. Most of our communication comes from 38% is tone of voice, and 55% is our nonverbal. So when you don't have facial expression anymore, you lose a great deal of ability to communicate. You might also notice that folks express emotion inappropriately at the wrong time, under the wrong circumstances. Difficulty reading social signals. They might lose their ability to show you their faces, but they lose the ability to read yours. It may look like they have a real lack of empathy towards others, but they will always be able to feel their own emotions. That ability remains. It's the ability to feel others' emotions that gets damaged. And loss of insight or self-awareness. So they lose the inability to recognize changes in themselves. And that's really a paradox. They forget that they forget if they are forgetful. They don't know that they have changed. They think they're just fine and they don't see what you're on about because there's nothing wrong with them. Their brain does not recognize any change within themselves. So what are some strategies that you can use? So there's a strategy called validation. Validation therapy was really invented and spread to the world through Naomi Feil. Feil. You can certainly look her up on the internet. There's lots of YouTubes. You can Google her, lots of books and movies. And she really said, what we want to do is we want to get away from reality orientation where we correct people. And what we want to do is we want to mirror people. We want to mirror their words or their expressions to help show your connection to them. And you can gently ask some questions. So validation is not about the reality of a situation. Validation is about joining somebody's journey wherever they're at, because to them, their reality is real. And they firmly believe in their reality because that's what their brain is telling them. Now, their brain is damaged. It has organic changes occurring. That means that their reality and your reality might not be lining up so much. But they believe what their brain is telling them because we always believe what our brains are telling us. So validation does involve listening. It involves listening to the person without adding our own reality on top, and our communication to help that person express themselves. As I said, it can involve repeating words or movements. You can paraphrase what somebody said to you. You can, ask some questions, see what they can tell you. I'm listening. Tell me more. So what you can do, and here's a bit of a technique when it comes to validation. This is called the 3 R's. Recognize, reassure, and redirect. Now you'll notice that these 3 R's are numbered, 1, 2, 3. And it's actually really super important that you do them in this particular order. So first is recognize. If somebody is upset, if you need to redirect somebody, the first thing you want to do, the first thing is recognize whatever emotion is pouring off of them. I can see you're mad. I can tell you're sad. I know you're upset. Name the emotion. Say it out loud for them. Recognize the emotion. People can really only retain one thought in their head at a time. Healthy people can have so many thoughts come so quickly that we think we have multiple thoughts. We think we multitask. We're actually just faster than people living with dementia. People living with dementia slow down in their ability to think and process. And when they get stuck on something, they're going to be stuck on that. So until we recognize whatever emotion is welling up in them, we'll never be able to move on to something else. So start with recognizing the emotion. Then some sort of reassurance. It depends on the situation. It might be, I'll check, I'll find out. I'm sorry, I'll look into it. I'm here for you. I won't leave. I will get whatever the right reassurance is. Part and parcel of the changes that sometimes occur with dementia is that people tend to be more anxious. It comes with chemical changes that occur in the brain along with the physiological changes that are changing the brain cell structures. So people often need reassurance. And then you can move on to redirection, changing the topic, changing the activity that you're working on, changing the room that you're in, go from the kitchen to the living room or the bedroom to the bathroom, whatever it is. But if you do it in this order, you're likely to be more successful. So a few tips and strategies. Things to do, hooray. Treat the person as an adult. This is actually huge. People might require the kind of help that we would give a child, but they're still adults with adult sensibilities. They have been adults for decades, and they have developed and they retain adult sensibilities. Provide a calm environment. People will reflect, even if they don't show it in their face. They reflect what's emanating off of you. So if you're getting stressed, it will heighten their stress. Try to simplify your instructions. One thought, one idea in one sentence at one time. Got to give pauses for people to catch up to what you're saying. So keep it simple. If you can establish a familiar routine, that's very, very helpful for people living with dementia. Routine they refer to as the GPS of dementia. It's very useful. Offer reassurance. I just talked about the importance of reassurance. Be patient and flexible. That's hard. It's hard when your brain is healthy and telling you one thing, but their brain is not seeing the world the same way you are. And try to support whatever strengths the person has. They might not be able to do X anymore, but can they do Y? Think about what they can do. Things we're encouraging you to avoid: speaking to the person as if he or she is a child, arguing, correcting, or attempting to reason. I will tell you that is a loser's game. When somebody has FTD, the logic reasoning center of the brain gets badly damaged, and you will not be able to talk somebody out of something. Please don't yell or scold the person. It is a disease process affecting their brain as opposed to deliberate misbehavior. And don't give up. If you feel like giving up, please be in touch with the society. There's no charge to talk to our social work team, and they can be a huge help. So here are some resources, some really good resources. There's a video put out by Teepa Snow. Teepa Snow is an occupational therapist. She works out of the States. She comes from the southern states, so she's got an accent, to our ears at least, a nice thick accent. But she is actually a world-renowned expert in geriatric care, and she knows her stuff. So you can look Teepa Snow up on YouTube. There's tons of videos by Teepa Snow, and she has a special FTD video, so you might want to look at that. And websites. The best website, hands down, is www.theaftd.org. I know it's out of the States, but it is the best website. They have a huge amount of information for you. You could also look up the Bluefield Project if you're interested in the medical side, FTD talks, research updates. Those are some links that will be of interest to you. Care partner support, there is an FTD support forum. And I think that's important to know because online forums, well, I'm talking to you right now during the time of COVID, and so we cannot meet in person. But online forums are hugely important because there often aren't enough people in a geographic area to create an FTD support group because it is such a rare form of dementia. And so you can get support with other people experiencing the journey that you are on through this online venue. And so there are some other support groups for care partners in general. The first one was specifically for FTD, and then dementia carers. There's a website for dementia carers. No matter what kind of dementia, you will probably find very useful information there. We also have something that might be useful because part of FTD is often this disinhibition or this inability to be socially appropriate. These are wallet cards that you could discreetly slip to somebody if you are in a store or in a restaurant or in a circumstance where perhaps the person you are with is doing something untoward and you don't really want to stop and speak in front of the person about what's happening. You can slip this to somebody. There are cards for the person living with dementia, and there are cards for care partners. We have a variety of services at the Alzheimer Society, Waterloo, Wellington, and they are there for you to use. So I encourage you, please be in touch with us. We have supportive counseling, we have education, we have the music project, and particularly for people with FTD or in later stage dementia, this is a brilliant program that we offer. It provides a personalized iPod. So an iPod where it's organized with the appropriate music for your person, and we provide that at no charge. Earphones, charger, iPod, it's an extended loan as long as you need it, and it can be very, very useful, particularly when language is impaired. We have social and recreational program. One of the best is Minds in Motion, and that involves physical activity along with a social component. It's offered in a 2-hour time block, so an hour of activities that really get your heart pumping, although you can do them seated. You don't have to be in mint condition, believe me. You can do it seated. But that Minds in Motion program involves both the person living with dementia and their care partner. And we hear back from the participants that A, they love it, and B, it's such a great place for them to be because their care partner isn't worried about anything and the person feels comfortable because it's designed, the environment's designed for them. both parties relax and find support from the other group members who are going down the same path that they are going down. So please don't hesitate to be in touch with us. You can check our website. It has a lot of information. One of the things that you can link to either through this slide set or just Google it or on our website is the Finding Your Way program. I'm sorry to say that approximately 6 out of 10 people will become disoriented and become lost if they have dementia. And so this Finding Your Way Ontario website is designed to help caregivers know how to reduce that risk, why that risk might happen, what you can do to reduce the opportunities or what to do if it does happen, what's the latest technology that might be available to support you keeping somebody safe. So I strongly recommend it to you. One of the things that you can do is look online and see a safety booklet all about keeping people safe at home and in the community. And if you can't access it online, if you need a hard copy, please be in touch with our offices and we'll make sure that you get a hard copy of that. There are some education modules. If you like doing online education, 4 little 15-minute modules that are part of the Finding Your Way website that you can look at. They will help you understand dementia, why people get lost, what to do if people get lost, and communication. And the other thing that you'll find on the Finding Your Way website is material posted by other people who have had experiences. And so they're real life stories. So that can be very supportive for you. We always recommend that every family, no matter what type of dementia somebody has, goes on the Finding Your Way website and prints off the, it's a 4-page form. It's an ID kit. And if you print off this ID kit, if a missing incident happens and you have already filled in the ID kit and you already have a picture, you're good to go, and have that ready and handy. If you have any questions about this, please call the office. We have other education programs. We have some real specialty programs, and they're called Enhancing Care. They focus on behavior. And since FTD often sees a lot of behavior changes, these programs might be just the ticket for you. There's a 4-week and an 8-week program, and they're offered in conjunction with Mount Sinai in Toronto. And all we need you to do is call the office, say you're interested in these programs, and we can see if we can support you in getting into those. One more thing, you may or may not know as you've watched this video that the Alzheimer Society Waterloo Wellington is not fully funded by the government. The Alzheimer Society has to raise 60% of our budget every year so that we can say to you when you call, what do you need? And no, it's not going to cost you a penny. We're just going to give you the services as long as you need what you need for any type of dementia. So if you're ever in a position to make a donation, I would ask you to think about making it to the Alzheimer Society Waterloo Wellington, and that will keep your dollars local for programs and services local. This is our contact information. So you can phone us, you can look at our website. On the website, we have a program guide. It's updated every couple of months, and it tells you everything, all the opportunities that we have for social recreational, for education, for information, outside links that might be of interest to you. So please go online and check out our program guide. If you're a Facebook person or a Twitter person, you can see we're on social media. And I really want to draw your attention to this button right here. This is the new symbol for YouTube. And that represents the arrow that you click. If you were to go onto our webpage, and here's the webpage, if you were to go on our webpage and scroll to the very, very bottom of the first page and click that button, the YouTube button, it would take you right to the page where you are now watching this video. And you can see a number of videos on a number of topics that are pertinent to people living with dementia. So that's what I have to share with you this morning. I want to thank you for joining us. I'm glad that you were able to find this video and watch this video. And again, I encourage you, please call the Society. Our counselors are there, to offer support and help and information, and all it takes is an email or a phone call. I wish you well. I hope you stay safe. Thank you very much.